Okay, so connecting memories um, today. And Dorothy had asked if I could include some shipwrecks in the life-saving services at Nauset. And I thought, sure. So we're going to start with shipwrecks. And in the olden days on Nauset Beach, the Great Beach, or the backside of the Outer Cape, it was a dead lee shore. It had no haven of refuge during a northeast gale of winter, and once caught close inshore, the ships were driven inexorably into the shifting and sandy shoals and the tremendous winter surf. So many wrecks broke up within a few hours, and their crews perished from exposure or drowning. And here are a few photos from our archives to help set the context for today's presentation. I found these in the 1962 Eastham Vacationist Handbook. And we have almost all of those Eastham Vacationist handbooks in our archives, and they're really a treasure trove of information. So you've got the Charles Campbell, you've got the schooner Messenger in the late 1800s. Most of these are late 1800s. The Katie Harding, the Katie J. Barrett. These are all right off Nauset. The schooner off Orleans over here, I couldn't find out which ship that was, but the Heraldine was another one. And here are some beachcombers, and they're waiting to strip the wrecked vessel. They helped with saving the crews of the vessels, and then they went to work on the ship itself to get whatever they could. And in 1914, we have an exhibit in our museum on the Castagna. And this was a freezing cold day, February 17th, 1914. And it's really amazing the story of this ship and how they saved most of the crew, but not all of them. And the Cape Ann, 1948. My aunt, Dorcas Gill, narrates a short video on the Cape Ann, and her husband was actually one of the beachcombers, the scavengers who got what he could from it. So in the aftermath of the wrecks, this is what's left on the beaches. And these are all from the archives also. So now I think we're going back to the life-saving services. And they included the halfway houses, the Three Sisters lighthouses, the U.S. life-saving station, the French cable station, the new Nauset light, and the new Coast Guard station. They also included the Mass Humane, whoops. Nope, I guess that's that. I'm sorry. So in more detail, a timeline to help you sort out the sequence of events and buildings that contributed to our history of various life-saving services. So 1787, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts created a humane society, and they built huts of refuge along the desolate shores. In 1802, there were the earliest halfway houses at Nauset Beach. 1838, the early Three Sisters, the brick Three Sisters that succumbed and went over the bluff. 1872, the Nauset Life Saving Station, and 8 others were, they had to, there was such corruption and such, oh, I'm at a loss for words. Anyway, when we get to it, I'll tell you. I'm really sorry. The French cable station was at Nauset in 1879 until 1891. The later Three Sisters, the wooden ones, came in 1892 and they were able to be moved much more easily than the brick ones. In 1914, the Cape Cod Canal was built, and that really helped with ameliorating all of the wrecks that happened on the outer beach. The life-saving service in 1915 became the U.S. Coast Guard, and the new Nauset Light, which came from Chatham, arrived in 1923. The new Coast Guard station replaced the old one in 1936. There's an interesting story about that. In 1940, Nauset Light was painted, the top half was painted red as a day marker. And in 58, the Coast Guard ended its service. And in 61, the National Park Service came. So all of these entities contributed to the Nauset life-saving services. Let's go back to the beginning and the Mass Humane Society. It was originally formed as a charitable organization, and I absolutely love this description, for the recovery of persons who meet with such accidents as to produce in them the appearance of death. And to that end, they provided shelter along the outside beach of Cape Cod for seamen who were cast ashore from wrecked vessels. And this is from the Oracle in 1975. There were 5 huts that were built from Provincetown to Chatham. And Henry David Thoreau, when he walked the outer beach, he called them charity huts. Altogether, they cost the society $192. And in his History of Wellfleet, Everett Nye noted that they were small wooden buildings with fireplaces and other conveniences. And some person in the vicinity, by occasional visits, would keep the huts in proper condition. So there was nothing organized at all, but they were there to help people who happened to be thrown up by the sea. There was a new lifeboat that was built, and it was housed in Cohasset in 1807. And I love this photo. It's not very good because it's in a book, The Lighthouses and Life Saving Along Cape Cod. But it was supposed to be less liable to capsize in the heavy surf that when they had to go out. Besides, oh, that boat, by the way, cost $1,400 to build. I thought that was quite a sum for 1841. So they built other boathouses. They were small. They were 20 by 8.5 feet, and they were painted red for visibility. By 1841, there were 81 stations along the Massachusetts coast, and there were 18 boats and rescue equipment, and they were all manned by volunteers. So I found this article in the archives, and it's one of Noel Biles' articles in the series Rear Window, where he looks back at stories from the Standard Times. This story was actually written in 1939, and it's a lifeboat that was uncovered by the sea. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I can move these. I can. So this is Captain Abbott Walker of Eastham. Oops. And Captain Dan Gould of Orleans. And they had been in the life-saving service for so many years, 30 years for Captain Walker, and since the 1870s for Dan Gould, that they recognized this as one of the surf boats. And it still had the wooden gunnels for holes for the oarlocks and the airtight compartments in the bow and the stern. And I just thought it was a really interesting peek into the past. Um, and these two men knew what it was, others wouldn't have. So we're moving on to the early Three Sisters. These photos are not of the early brick Three Sisters. They are the second set of wooden towers because we didn't have photography in 1838 for the Three Sisters. Um, well, we do have a couple of photos, and here's one right here. Two, actually. I'm going to move that over. And these bases of the original Three Sisters were just left in the ground where the lighthouses had been, and then they were allowed to fall over the bluff. And so one of them you can still see at certain low tides. Okay. This is a postcard. We have a wonderful postcard collection, and it's the they're 15 tall brick towers on a 60-foot bluff, 150 feet apart. They had stationary Winslow Lewis lamps, and a keeper's house was also built. So this is not a photograph, but it's a drawing, and that's why we can show it. This is the keeper's house and tower with the new wooden tower in 1892. And these wooden towers were 22 feet tall, and they were placed 30 feet from the cliff. But they used the same lights and the same lanterns as the old towers. So when they were on top of the bluff, they were about 97 feet above mean high tide. Another old postcard, the identical sisters. The center beacon is on your right, the south beacon and the north beacon. And a sketch of the central tower inside the beacon. And this is from the National Park Service in J. Brian West's Life on the Edge. Not a not very comfortable or commodious for them. This one is an old photo that I just love. And it's the Three Sisters, but I can't say much more. I just love this photo. And this one, the mother and her two children looking back on the Three Sisters. And I hadn't even realized that we had all these photos in our archives because I hadn't been into the archives to look for all of the pictures or photos or documents that we might have until I started researching for this project. And a color postcard. I think someone should have proofread it because it calls them the Nansit Three Lights in Northeast Eastham and the French Cable Landing Place. And now we're going to move to one of the keepers. This is Stephen Lewis. He was born in 1835 and died in 1926, so lived to a ripe old age. And he was lighthouse keeper at the Highland Light first, and then at Nauset Lights. He spent 40 years in the U.S. Lighthouse Service from 1874 to 1914. And he resigned at age 79 because of poor health. It was a rather lonely job, but the keepers kept busy. And I think he had to prove that he was earning his keep. Here's a page from the Journal of the Lighthouse Station at Nauset in June 1886. And this is courtesy of Susan Abbott at the National Lighthouse Preservation Society, Nauset Lighthouse Preservation Society. On the left-hand corner of the page, it's all of the wind, whether it's light or harsh or moderate, and where the wind is coming from, and whether it's rainy or dry or whatever. And on the right hand page, it's all of the jobs he did. So he did an awful lot of whitewashing and painting and scraping and doing whatever he had to do to keep that lighthouse in good order. And the early, oh, I want to clarify, there were two keepers on the Nauset. One was the life-saving keeper, and the other one was the lighthouse keeper. So I'm leaving the lighthouse keepers and we're moving into the life-saving service and the keeper of the life-saving house. So a major step was taken in 1872 when Congress established the U.S. Life-Saving Service. And they were manned almost entirely by local men. And this is their motto, their logo, and this their motto. You have to go out, but you don't have to come back. And this is the Nauset Life Saving Station, built in 1872, along with 8 others on the Outer Cape. And I'll give you a little bit of history about why the service was formed. It was reorganized and extended for efficiency because before the 1870s, there were no drilled or disciplined crews. There were irresponsible custodians, lack of equipment, pillage and decay. This is all from a report. The Marine Revenue Service was charged with investigating the stations and with making the report. And this is what they found. They wrote that absolutely no discipline was found among the crews. No care had been taken of the apparatus. Some of the stations were in ruins. Others lacked such articles as powder, rockets, and shot lines. Every portable article had been stolen from many stations, and the money that Congress had appropriated had been practically wasted. So, the extreme reorganization. Stations were now manned by skilled boatmen who were placed in charge. Inefficient keepers were removed. The expert surfmen and the patrols of the coast at night and during thick weather by day were inaugurated. But the life-saving stations were too far apart for crews to assist one another, so that they built new stations. And each of these stations should have been within 3 to 5 miles of each other. Okay, on Cape Cod, the distances were a little bit more, but generally they're as close to 5 miles apart as they can be. Here's a map. It's of the lighthouses. Let me move this again, I guess. Here we go. So all of the red dots are the lighthouses on Cape Cod, and they're almost always in close proximity to the life-saving station, but not always. Notice that the lighthouses are not only on the ocean side. We've got one at Wellfleet, we've got one at Billingsgate, and we've got one at Sandy Neck over here. So in 1872, the initial 9 stations were Monomoy, Orleans, Nauset, Cahoon Hollow, Pamet River, Peaked Hill Bars, Highland, and Race Point. And then eventually 4 more, and also the ones that I mentioned earlier than that. So the Nauset Life Saving Station. The original boathouses, you'll remember, were 20 feet by 8.5. Well, the Nauset stations, the new ones, they were plain. They were also painted red, but they were 42 feet long and 18 feet wide. And this station was added onto and moved twice before it was replaced by the current Coast Guard structure in 1936. The early ones had 2 stories and 4 rooms. It had the observatory on the top and a tall flagstaff right close by, and the wide double leaf doors for their lighthouse boats. Inside the station, there was the crew mess room and the boat and apparatus room, and then the sleeping room for the crew and the storeroom. And they had weekly tasks that they had to do. Monday was putting the station in order. Tuesday was drills and launching and landing a lifeboat through the surf. Drills in the International and General Code of Signals on Wednesdays. Beach apparatus and breeches buoys on Thursdays. Resuscitation drills on Fridays. Saturday was wash day. And Sunday was devoted to religious practices. This is Captain Alonzo Burse, keeper of the Nauset station. He was the 3rd keeper, and he grew up on Monomoy Island and went to sea at an early age, and then served in the Civil War, came back to the Cape, went to sea again, and then returned to join the Nauset crew. And this is a photo of the mess room where the crew members would hang out. Here's one of the drills. They're all in white for the practice drill. Down here, you have the Lyle gun, which would shoot the projectile, which would be attached to the line from the faking block. And I'm not going to go into detail about the life-saving work, but if you want to know more, you can visit the museum because we have a wonderful life-saving exhibit. And this summer on June 28th, Dave and Marcia Bromley, who both participate in the life-saving reenactments in Provincetown all summer, will give a presentation at the schoolhouse. It's Thursday evening at 7 that explains the whole process, and it's really fascinating. So the lifesavers in foul weather, the foul weather gear, they use the horses to pull the wagons, but during a storm or more likely a raging gale, if the horse got spooked, the men had to take over. And then another horse, what intrigues me about this photo is their life vests. It's I just don't know how they could do much good for them, but they were all so adept at handling these boats that there were very few fatalities among the crews when they went out. This is a photo from May 13th, 1901, the Nauset crew, and every single one of them signed the back. And I just love it. And they're all Eastham names: Burse, Daniels, House, Mayo, Gill, Collins, Higgins, Snow. And it's just fascinating to look through these photos and think of the families and what they did for others. So the day watch and the night patrols. This was something that was instituted in 1872. So during the day, the watch was from the lookout, that tower on that little room like a cupola on top of the building. During the night or during foggy or thick weather, the watch was by patrol. And they had to walk every foot of the waterfront in each district. Now, a district is comprised of the station which, as I said, are about 5 miles apart, and the area to either side of it to halfway. And then that's how we get the name, the halfway house. And the night patrol was divided into 4 watches, but they're not equal um, times. Sunset to 8 o'clock, 8 to 12 is a 4-hour shift, midnight to 4 is a 4-hour shift, and 4 a.m. to sunrise. And I just put down the distances between Cahoon's Hollow and Orleans because they're the 2 stations on either side of Nauset. So they had to walk 4.5 miles to get to the Cahoon Hollow, and 3 1/8 to Orleans. Here's one of the halfway houses. And what the night patrolmen did, they set out in opposite directions, always as close to the surf as possible. And they met up with the surfmen from the adjoining station, and they had to exchange checks. If the other surfman didn't show up, then the one who was there had to wait until he did, or he continued on until he arrived at the next station to find out what had caused this failure to meet up with him. Now, some of the patrols carried a watchman's time clock that used a key, and the key was used on a post that had secured the watch. And I think it was to prove that they had gone as far as they should have gone, and they had to change the time on the clock to when they had been there. You'll notice that in this sketch, there are what look like telephone lines, wires, and they were. In the 1920s, the keepers were notified of disasters by telephone, and the crew was summoned to a wreck that way. So they had a lot of paperwork to do. And this is one of the forms, the transcript of their journal. So the condition of the surf at the different times of day, the direction of the wind, and excuse me, the barometer, the thermometer, the sunlight, all of these particulars of the weather, and also who they were meeting from where and when. So the person met so and so from this station and then that other person. So they have a real record of everything that was done, including whether the house was thoroughly cleaned or in good repair, or the apparatus was okay, if anyone was absent. And then they had general remarks. And they had to note what kind of ship had passed during that day, whether it was a bark, a brig, a schooner, steamer, or sloop. One other thing that the patrols did was carry at all times a Coston signal. And the Coston signal is a brilliant red light that flashes. So if a surfman sighted a vessel in distress or running into danger, he fired this brilliant red Coston signal. And to the shipwrecked crew, it meant one of 2 things. Either that they've been seen and help is on the way, or if they're approaching danger and getting too close to some of these shoals, that it's time to haul offshore and move on out of there. So here's a sketch of the Coston signal, and here is the check that the surfmen exchanged when they went to each of the halfway houses. So now we have some postcards, and the next slides will be photos of the drills. So some of the horses, and in this photo, so I guess it was too stormy for him. This was a calm day, and it's a photo, and I just love it. The Lyle gun is here also. There's someone in the breeches buoy here, and you can find out all about this. This would be the ship, the practice, and he would be hauled in from there, and a colored postcard. Um, this is a these are photos of the Coast Guard. Um, these are surf boat drills from the early 1900s. Um, on January 28th, 1915, President Woodrow Wilson signed the act to create the Coast Guard. So the photos show the crew when they became the Coast Guard rather than the life-saving service. And this is Abbott Walker, the same gentleman that discovered and knew what that boat, the lifeboat in the dunes was. And over here, we have Ingwe Rongner, and down here also. And this is the Coast Guard in rather good weather and in some really freezing weather. These are some of the surf boat drills. What's interesting is that the captain was always the last one into the boat. And some of these are from Dalton's book, and some of them are photographs. Excuse me, I need some water. Here they are in winter. And I believe the last photo of the old station. This is in the early 1930s. And the station had been painted white, and it was soon to go out of commission. But for now, we're going to move on to the French cable station. So the French cable station at Nauset. First of all, in 1869, the first French cable was installed and landed in Duxbury, Mass. And then 1879, the new French cable was laid to North Eastham at Nauset Light. It was a two-story station, but it was in a really isolated area and very difficult to reach in bad weather. And this is the crew. Here's a close-up of the crew. What's interesting is that none of them at the French cable station crew were from France, and they had all been trained by the British in England. But here they are, and common Eastham names again among these crew members. This is the postcard that I like so much, and this time I have not cropped it so that you can see the French cable station in relationship to the Three Sisters. But in 1891, the French cable station was moved to Orleans. And the current building was built there, and that remained in operation until 1915, except for a couple of years during World War II, when the station was closed for security reasons. It's a wonderful museum now, and they're open for people. In the summertime, they were open earlier this year. I think they might be open this weekend too. And here's a map. I love to use maps. And this is the Le Direct. the telegraph cable that came directly to Orleans from France. And so we're going to move to the Coast Guard station, not because it's next chronologically, but because it follows on from the life-saving station, and then we'll return to Nauset Light, excuse me, which is so iconic. So 1936, this is the new Coast Guard station, and it was built a mile or so down the shore from the previous. So a little story. Henry Morgenthau Jr. was Secretary of the Treasury, and he vacationed on Cape Cod every summer. And he and some fellow picnickers were on vacation in 1935. And there was a summer thunderstorm, and it drove them to seek shelter in the old Coast Guard station, the one built in 1872. Well, a few weeks after that, Morgenthau went back to Washington, D.C., and a new station was authorized. And Morgenthau, who took a personal interest in the building's construction and visited the site during the summer of 1936. So a little bit of influence there for the new station. I love these old aerial photos. This is in the 1940s. This is a calendar picture from the Cape Cod 5, one of their calendars. They use historical photos. And this is a photo from the 40s and 50s also. Notice all of these cottages. We're looking towards, this is the road up to Nauset Light up here in the corner. And these cottages were all there. This one was called the Fish House, I believe. And here's another photo, same, well, different view, but the cottages are all still there. And now this is where we drive up. This one is in the 1960s, I believe. And one more. I was on my way home from the lighthouse. What I learned about the lighthouse, I learned from giving tours there last summer. I volunteered. So one gray and drizzly day, as I drove home, I came this route, and I always catch my breath the minute I come over that hill. It's an unforgettable view. The cottages are gone, and it's just beautiful. And so a final postcard will be our segue from the Coast Guard station to the Nauset Light, the new one with the red. So this is Nauset Light in 1923 when it was first moved to Eastham from Chatham. And it was located 200 feet from the cliff, and it replaced the last wooden tower of the Three Sisters. It had a 20,000 candle power kerosene lamp, and it was installed within the existing fourth order Fresnel lens. And I learned all this from giving tours there. But here's Nauset Light pre-1940s, when it was still white. And this little pathway along this fence, wait until you see it in some other photos. It goes almost all the way to Marconi. Here is post 1940. The top half was painted red as a day marker to help fishermen and lobstermen know where they were. Because of the curvature of the arm of the Cape, it was very difficult for people to know where they were, whether they were at Highland Light or Nauset or So they needed to differentiate. The lights in the 40s still flashed white at 3-second intervals, kind of mimicking the three sisters, the three lights of the three sisters. But it wasn't until 1981 that the light was switched to alternating red and white light. And I didn't even realize that until I went, well, wait a minute. As a kid, the light was always three, and now it's white and red. And I had no idea that when that change had happened, but now I do. Here's a great picture of the parking lot, 1940. It certainly is a bygone age. Can you imagine trying to park without any painted lines today? I hope you're chuckling. Thank you. I heard that. Bob's Doghouse. Does anybody remember Bob's Doghouse? This was in the 1940s. At first, he used propane. And then this is a picture postcard, but this is the back of Bob's Doghouse right here, very close to the bluff. And electricity came to Nauset Beach in 1952. And actually, when electricity came, it put the keeper out of business because he no longer had to manually do the lights with the pulleys, the system that he had. And so that was the end of an era there. The 50s and 60s, here's Bob's Doghouse. The picture isn't very good, but this is that road that I told you about, heading down towards Marconi. This is the location of the present light. Here's one of the three sisters. I believe it's when it was a school for the New York City Ballet, and far more cars here in the 50s and 60s. Here is a wonderful aerial view. I got this on Digital Commonwealth, and that road goes all the way down. If this thing were out of the way, you'd see the sorry. You'd see the Marconi Tower down there. So notice that the lighthouse is quite far from the edge, and this house also, but not for long. This was 1965. Uh-oh, wait. Here we are, early 1990s. It seems that the lighthouse is getting closer to the edge. You can see the base of one of the three sisters down here. And this house doesn't have long before it's going to go over. 1993, about 50 feet from the cliff, people knew that Nauset Lighthouse had to be moved or be lost to the sea and join its older sisters. But if you look carefully on this photo, let's see, move this up here. Here it is again. And so Susan Abbott again let me use these photos from the Nauset Light Preservation Society. And on November, let me go back there. The Coast Guard declared that the light was surplus and that it had to be darkened. So it planned to dismantle and remove the lighthouse. But on November 10th, 1993, the Nauset Light Preservation Society was established to raise the funds to move the lighthouse. It took 2 years and a $300,000 grant by the US Department of Transportation. But by 1995, the Coast Guard granted an operation and maintenance lease to the society, and they prepared to move the light. So this shows the erosion. This is from the Cape Codder, I believe, 1961. and 1996. According to the caption here, which you can't see, the erosion rate is from 3 to 6 feet per year, but in recent years, the rate has accelerated. And between 2012 and 2016, 46 feet were lost at Nauset Light. 4 years, 46 feet. Just amazing. So, Nauset Light Preservation Society to the rescue. In October, there was a groundbreaking ceremony to initiate the move to a site about 300 feet southwest of the tower. And in November, it was moved at a cost of about $330,000. Here it is. Loads of Eastham folks turned up to watch the move, including my mom. And I'm wondering if any of you were there on this unbelievable weekend. Shout out if you were.
I was there.
Yay! So this is a collage of photos, and it shows the progress of the move, starting on Friday morning, Friday afternoon, Saturday day, Saturday evening. I'm missing one. Saturday evening and Sunday. And it took just painstaking movements to get that over there. And if you visit the lighthouse and go on one of their tours Wednesdays and Sundays in the summertime, you will learn the whole history. It's just fascinating. This I love, and it provides perspective. So the yellow is the 1890 shoreline out here in the water. The three red dots are the three sisters in 1838. The green dotted line is the 1960 bluff edge. The beach parking lot in 1960. And a fun fact, during hurricanes, my mom used to drive us over to the beach, and we'd place during the eye of the hurricane when it wasn't windy, and we'd place bets on how much of the parking lot had gone over. And then when the wind started up again, she'd say, "Come on, girls, get in the car. We're going home." Here's the 2018 parking lot. This is the former location of Nauset Light right here. This is the current location. And here are the three sisters' current locations. And some facts about the in meters and in feet per year of the erosion. This is a photo showing the lighthouse, which has moved, but the keeper's house had not yet been moved. That was moved a couple years after the lighthouse. This is a photo by Sherm Lovering, who gave it to me when I interviewed him about the lighthouse, and I just love it in the old car. This is a photo that I took at a road race, and it was just so beautiful that day, and I was going in along the paths by the old Three Sisters. Here is the lighthouse, giving a tour. Some of my guides that gave the tours with me. This little kid right up here is my great nephew, Nate. And this little face in this porthole is my great niece, Eva. And they loved it. And so here they are coming down the stairs. And I love this Nautilus stairway. If you're wondering, there are 43 or 44 steps up to the watch room. And of course, Cape Cod potato chips, because they have been so supportive of the Nauset Light Preservation Society. So, and this more erosion, walking along the beach with one of my sisters, we saw this Adirondack up on the cliff, and then we came across the lighthouse. So I managed to get the white light, but not the red one. And the erosion will never stop. There's a wonderful mural in the oil house at the lighthouse. And if you get a chance to go over there, you'll be amazed. So these are the works cited in the photos that I used. And I need to thank Susan and Sherm of the Nauset Lake Preservation Society, and of course our archives volunteers. And thank you very much for coming out on this nasty day. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but you wouldn't have wanted me to. So thank you very, very much.
Okay.